minute.
Okay.
Okay, the Parshas Yisro, at the very beginning of Parshas Yisro, the Torah tells us, Vayishma Yisro Cholohein Midyan, Yisro, the minister of Midyan, Chosei Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, Eis Kol Asher Asa, L'kim LeMoshe, Ulamo, L'Yisrael Amo, Ki Hotzi Hashem Es Yisrael MiMitzrayim. And Rashi, based on Memorich Hazal, there are all kinds of different opinions, but Rashi says, Mashmua Shomo Ba. What was it that he heard that made him come? So Rashi says, Kriyas Yamsuf and Melchemes Amalek. Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and Melchemes Amalek, even though the taking out of the Jewish people from Mitzrayim was the greatest thing, as we see later on in the Psukim. But what was it that inspired Yisro to join the Jewish people, or to want to join the Jewish people, was Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and Melchemes Amalek, and the war against Amalek. And the question is, what is special about Kriyas Yamsuf and Melchemes Amalek from all the other nisim, all the other forms of salvation that took place? In Mitzrayim, there were 10 makos. And all these makos, all these plagues defied the laws of nature. Here's Kriyas Yamsuf certainly defied the laws of nature, as we emphasize in the Haggadah. But certainly Melchemes Amalek did not defy the laws of nature in the same manner. Nevertheless, Melchemes Amalek played a bigger role in inspiring Yisro to come and join the Jewish people. And it would seem that there might be a common denominator between Kriyas Yamsuf, or the events surrounding Kriyas Yamsuf, and Melchemes Amalek, and the war of Amalek, that these two events were the inspiration. Undoubtedly, and we see how Yisro reacts about Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Jewish people leaving Egypt. He's the first person, Chazal tell us, who to give a bracha, to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the miracle of Yetzias Mitzrayim, of the exodus of Egypt. But it was Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, and Melchemes Amalek, that were the inspiration. There was no question that it had an impact. Everything had an impact on Yisro. And Yisro, Chazal tell us at one time, was an advisor to Paro. And of course, because he did not approve of the way Paro was treating the Jewish people, he had to run for his life. He had to disassociate himself from the high position that he had in Egypt, which at that time was the most advanced country in the world. But what inspired him, and He was very much opposed to the decrees that Paro was making against the Jewish people. But what inspired him to come was the splitting of the sea, Kriyas Yamsuf, and Milchemes Amalek. Now, when we take a look at Kriyas Yamsuf, we see something very interesting. The first pasuk of the Shira, which is the Jewish people's reaction, is a Shira Lashem Ki Go Go, Sus V'Roch V'Ramei V'Yam. The Jewish people, in telling why they feel this obligation, this need to sing a song of praise and thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They say, why? Because how did HaKadosh Baruch Hu display his greatness? Demonstrate his greatness was Sus V'Roch V'Rama B'Yam, because he drowned the riders of Paro's cavalry, if I could use that word, together with the horses. Seems very odd that this was the main reason that the Jewish people sang Da'az Yashir. And it's very interesting that Chazal tell us that Da'az Yashir is something that is going to be sung in the future. And to a large degree, it was sung continuously from the time of Kriyas Yamsuf up till this day, and even till, according to Chazal, Tchiyas HaMesim. I think that when Klal Yisrael, our ancestors, sang the Da'az Yashir, they were explaining why now, all of a sudden, they had this spontaneous reaction of singing Shira. And there is a difference between Da'az Yashir and the Shira on one hand, and Hallel on the other hand. Hallel is a song of praise. Shira, as it appears from the Ramban, from the Ran and Psachim, the name of the Gonim, and the name of the as explained by the Brisker Rav, Shira is a spontaneous reaction to an event that just took place. And undoubtedly, the Jewish people, even during their leaving, while leaving Egypt and even before leaving Egypt, were offering words of praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After all, the 10 Makos, the 10 plagues that overtook the Egyptians, and they dwelled within the Egyptian society, and it didn't affect them. And here they saw their oppressors, those who killed their children, those who enslaved them, suffering, being attacked by nature itself, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through the laws of nature or the breaking of the laws of nature. So undoubtedly, they had words of praise of God. But these words of praise did not reach the level of a shira, and certainly not the level of the Yashir. You see, the Torah doesn't even mention the words of praise that the Jewish people might have offered as a reaction to the events that took place, to the Aseres HaMakos, to the leaving of Egypt. But when it comes to the Yashir, the Torah not only writes the whole Yashir, but even leaves empty spaces. And as I heard from my father, the empty spaces is the parts of a shira that are not written. When someone speaks, when someone offers words of praise, so the praise are limited to the words. But if the praise is said in the form of a song, then it expresses emotions and feelings that words are not capable of expressing. The empty spaces, the extra empty spaces that you find in the Shira, that you don't find in the rest of the Torah, that's expressive of emotions and feelings that could not even be expressed in words. A song conveys not only with its words, but it conveys with its tune, which is expressive of the feelings and emotions. And apparently, up till the time that the Jewish people saw Kriyas Yamsuf, until they saw the sea split, until they saw themselves go through the area that had previously been the sea, and until they saw the sea, the waters of the sea coming back together and drowning their oppressors and their chariots and horses. The Jewish people didn't have that emotion and feeling that would necessitate and that would be expressive of a shira, of a song. Why is it that way? And I think the reason is because the Jewish people were constantly looking back. Yes. The Jewish people in Parshas Beshalach were told that when they left Egypt armed. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I can't let them take the shortest path, because in spite of the fact that they're going armed, as soon as they'll see the Plishtim, as soon as they will encounter potential enemies, they will immediately turn back and run to Egypt. What did that demonstrate? That demonstrated that the Jewish people, even though they were freed from Egypt, even though Egypt was already in ruins, they still had a servile perspective. And it's because of that servile perspective, they were constantly looking back. We have people today who carry guns, and there are situations where the guns are necessary. But sometimes those who carry guns, it's not to protect them from the enemies that attack them, and very often they do, whether it's in shul or in other Jewish organizations, could be by museums. Terrorists come and shoot, even in the United States. And there is a danger. And there is a need to protect ourselves from that danger. How it should be done varies. But sometimes people take the gun not because of the insecurity that emanates externally from others, but somehow they feel that the gun makes them a greater person. And perhaps that was the reason the Jewish people, because after having been slaves, they were holding the weapon to show that they were free. But apparently HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw through them in a manner that they did not want to see through themselves. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, they might be carrying weapons, but as soon as they confront the enemy, they will run back to Egypt. So in a sense, the Jewish people, in spite of the externalism of the weapons that they carried, they wanted, they were not yet at that point that they could rid themselves of that servile perspective. But however, at Kriyas Yamsuf, they said, Ashira Lashem ki goa goa, sus v'roch v'varma bayam. What happened at Kriyas Yamsuf? At Kriyas Yamsuf, the Jewish people saw that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about a situation by killing not just the riders, but the horses also, that Egypt no longer, and the crossing of the sea, Egypt no longer had the ability to run after the Jewish people. The Jewish people at that point could stop looking back and they could look forward. Yisro, having been in Egypt, having been an advisor to Paro, and having been a very smart person who understood people very well. You see, he gives advice to Moshe Rabbeinu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu approves of the advice that he gave. He understood that it's one thing to take the Jews away from the situation of slavery. It's another thing to take the slavery away from the Jews. And he was not yet ready to join the Jewish people, so long as the main perspective that the Jewish people had of themselves was as slaves, whether it's slaves to Egypt or slaves to the Plishtim or slaves to the other nations. He understood, yes, there might have even been Matan Torah already, but to the degree that we are slaves of other nations, that we have a servile perspective, even though it's an internal slavery, sense of slavery. But to that degree, we're not servants of God. God said, "Avadayhem v'lo avadim la'avadim." We cannot be true servants of God if we are the servants of the other nations. And this is the reason why Yisro was inspired. Why Yisro was inspired by Kriyas Yamsuf, because at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf, for the first time, the Jewish people were able to rid themselves of the servile perspective of being slaves of Egypt, of being slaves of the Egyptian people. There was the potential of the Jewish people seeing themselves as being completely free and thereby becoming true servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avadayhem v'lo avadim la'avadim. And the same thing we see by Amalek. The Jewish people were attacked at the end of Parshas Yisro. Excuse me, the end of Parshas Beshalach. The end of Parshas Beshalach. So the Amalek attacks the Jewish people. Vayova Amalek, and Moshe tells Yoshua, "B'char lanu anoshim, choose for us people to go fight Amalek." It's very interesting, and the war against Amalek, to a certain degree, is an eternal war. Milchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. There could be discussions whether it has reference. When we say Milchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor, does it have reference to the Amalek nation or the people, the descendants of the Amalek nation? Or does it have reference even to those nations who have the ideology of Amalek? My uncle suggests that we have two different parshios about fighting Amalek. One parsha is in Chumash Dvarim, in Kiseitse, that Mocho Timcha Zecher Amalek, that's the mitzvah of fighting against the nation of Amalek, of the genetic Amalek, if you want. And in Parshas B'Shalach, Milchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor, that's talking about a nation that fighting a nation who has the ideology of Amalek, who wants to destroy the Jewish people. But the Torah emphasizes Milchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. The war continues. And because of this, God says, in every generation, or from the original generation, from the original war, there's a continuous war, that it's the same war. It continues. But here, for the first time, the Jewish people had to raise arms. They had arms when they went out of Egypt, but they were not ready to use those arms. They still saw themselves as being servile. But when they were confronted with Amalek, they were able to raise an army under the leadership of Yehoshua and to destroy Amalek. And many question, you shouldn't think that the war against Amalek is a war that we fight simply to destroy that nation. When we are given heavenly guidance, heavenly directive to fight Amalek, whether it's through the Urim V'Tumim that gives us the permission, or whether it's through the words of a Navi, as Shmuel told Shaul to go fight Amalek, and as the Rambam in Hagdamah to Perish HaMishnah tells us that the Navi is the one who instructs the king to fight, to wage war against Amalek. It's not just that this is the time. As my father would say, when Shmuel discusses about Shaul not fulfilling his mandate to fight Amalek. So he says, Pakadati, he quotes the name of God, Pakadati es asher asa Amalek. I remember what Amalek did to the Jewish people when the Jewish people left Egypt. And my father said, how is it that God says Pakadati instead of Zacharti? I remember both words. Pakadati is remember and Zacharti is remember. Why is it that we employ the Lashon Pekida? And my father said there are two forms of remembrance. I remember something from the past. That's Zacharti. Pakadati is when there is something in the present that reminds me about something that took place in the past. In other words, God instructs the Jewish people to wage the war against Amalek only when there is something about the nation of Amalek that reminds God of the Amalek nation that attacked the Jewish people when they left Egypt. And in a sense, we could suggest that's the idea, Milchama LaHashem ba'Amalek midor dor. Doesn't just mean in every generation, but it could mean Milchama LaHashem ba'Amalek midor dor from the generations back. It's not Meidor Lidor, but Meidor Dor from generations ago. In other words, when we receive a command from a Navi, or we're told by the Urim V'Tumim that Amalek that we should go fight Amalek, it's because, and to a certain degree, the Brisker Rav says, Amalek's rishus has reached a certain level that reminds God of the ancient Amalek. And what was the ultimate sin of ancient Amalek? The ultimate sin of ancient Amalek was that they wanted to destroy the Jewish people. So I think that when we receive a heavenly command to fight Amalek, it is a war of self-defense. Just as the first battle of Amalek was a war of self-defense. Amalek came after the Jewish people to destroy the Jewish people. When God feels that we are approaching a situation that if we let Amalek alone, they are going to destroy the Jewish people. They're going to attempt to destroy the Jewish people. So it becomes a war of self-defense for us, even before Amalek attacked the Jewish people. When we are attacked by a nation who has the ideology of Amalek, it becomes a war of self-defense when we are attacked by them. But regarding the nation of Amalek, where we need a directive who did not yet attack us, and we need a directive from heaven to fight Amalek, then it's not just that God says, go fight Amalek, but pakadati. Amalek now is like Amalek there, then. And if you don't attack Amalek first, Amalek will come and destroy you. Therefore, God commands us to defend ourselves. And included in this mitzvah of waging war against Amalek, there might be different halachas, how that battle is to be fought. But included in that is the mitzvah of destroying, of defeating, of eliminating the ability of a nation who has the ideology of Amalek, of destroying Amalek. When God tells us to destroy Amalek, genetic Amalek, Be'ishvad Isha, and we're very troubled about it. I think that what we're being told is, if you don't attack them now, yes, now, they're not yet ready. They did not yet join the army to destroy you. But God, am telling you, they are going to. And you better attack them first. So the war against Amalek is a defensive war. When it comes to the nation, the genetic nation of Amalek, it's a defensive war. It's a defensive war because it's a defensive war because God told us through the Navi or through the Urim V'Tumim, go to war because pakadati. If you don't attack them now, yes, many of them are too young. They're not going to fight. They're not going to. But if you don't attack them now, they are going to destroy you later. In a sense, because of the information we receive from heaven, it's a preemptive strike. It's a preemptive strike to save our children, to save our families, to save our nation. And of course, when a nation who has the ideology of Amalek, even when we have no Navi, even when we have no Urim V'Tumim, it's a defensive war. And according to my uncle And it quotes in the name of my grandfather, and in certain places I saw that he quoted in the name of Reb Chaim. It's a defensive war. That's why we could suggest that the war against the nation that attacks the Jewish people is identified with Amalek, because the war against the nation of Amalek is also a defensive war. So the war against the nation that has the ideology of Amalek is a defensive war. Has to be is a war of defense. The two are both defensive wars, but here it's very interesting. The Jewish people, the Jewish people, for the first time, they go to war themselves. When it came to the Aseres Hamakos, they sat back, and the Nisim took place in front of them. It didn't show that they had the ability to fight back. It didn't show that they get rid themselves of that servile perspective. And even when they marched out of Mitzrayim, the Chamushim, with military equipment, with weapons, it didn't show. There's a difference between costume and uniform. Very often, people put on uniforms, but are really just costumes. The weapons that the Jewish people held when they went out of Egypt might have been just costumes. They didn't have the psychological ability to use it in a manner to defend themselves. But at the time of Amalek, when Amalek attacked them, they responded to the call, and serving under Yeshua, they destroyed the army of Amalek. And this is what we have to understand. Amalek, when we fight Amalek, we don't only fight Amalek because of the present danger. Yes, a nation that has the ideology of Amalek, we don't attack unless they attack us first. But once we are attacked, it becomes a milchemes Amalek, a war against Amalek, against a nation that has the ideology of Amalek. And in fighting Amalek, we don't just limit our battle to the danger of today, but we have to fight to eliminate the danger of tomorrow. And this is the mistake that we have made since the time of the creation of the state. We only eliminate the danger of today. And when we protest, I shouldn't say we, chas v'shalom, when people protest that Israel is carrying it too far, that it's no longer necessary, in a sense, they're saying, let us give them the ability to come kill more Jews. Perhaps not today, but tomorrow and the day after. So the hands of those who have that attitude is stained with the blood of the Jewish people, not just of this generation, but is stained with the blood of the Jews of the former generations. Yisro, he understood, he recognized who HaKadosh Baruch Hu was. You see, he talked about Yetzias Mitzrayim, he praised HaKadosh Baruch Hu. taking the Jewish people out of Egypt. But what inspired him to come was that the Jewish people demonstrated they had the ability to rid themselves of the servile perspective. Because unless we rid ourselves of the servile perspectives, sometimes we'll have a day here and a day there, but tomorrow we'll have a problem. And I think this is the problem. Problem is the Jewish people, even today, after 2,000 years of Golus, many of them have a servile perspective. Some for political reasons and some for psychological reasons. But we have to demonstrate, we have to realize that the war against the nations that attack us is a war of defense. But when we're fighting the nation of Amalek or a nation that has the ideology of Amalek, we are defending not just ourselves, but we're defending our children and our grandchildren. And if we don't understand that a war of defense is not just for us today, but for tomorrow and for future generations, defending future generations as well, then the Jewish people that chas v'shalom are going to be murdered. The response of those who try to appease the Umas Olam, those who try to show that their universal perspective over their loyalty to the Jewish people. And when it comes to Amalek, we know Amalek attacks the Jewish people because it's part of a war against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to know that if we do not assume responsibility to protect the Jewish people of future generations, the Jews of future generations, who unfortunately will be killed by the Sonei Yisrael, the responsibility will be on those Jews who try to limit the Jewish people's response. Of course, we have to act in a humane manner, but being human doesn't mean to allow ourselves to commit national suicide. And unless we understand that when we fight a war of defense, we're defending not just today, but we're defending tomorrow, we are committing national suicide. We look forward to the day when we'll be able to live in peace and we wouldn't have to worry about Amalek or the nations who have the ideology of Amalek. Okay.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Can the Jewish people ever be considered Amalek? Certain Jews who act in a very
The
way
Zohar,
that's very difficult that makes things bad for Bnei Israel.
the Zohar says that there could be Amalekius among the Jews also. Of course, it has to be understood, not necessarily in a literal sense, unless these people become Rodfim of the Jewish people, which sometimes, unfortunately, happens.
But yeah, we see like Bnei Banav Shel Haman,
Live the
Torah
Torah,
B'nei.
yeah,
So
right.
there's no prohibition of Amalek
But
converting the way there is for
genetic Amalek, there was no prohibition of because there was no Navi that told us to go fight. that it was not. It's true that first of all there is some doubt as to whether Haman himself was from the nation of Amalek or whether Agag. Haman was a descendant of Agag. And it seems that the kings of the various nations at that time very often were taken from another nation. But even assuming that Agag was genetically Amalek and not just the king of Amalek, but it wasn't. It was mainly a milchama against the people who were in the ideological Amalek, and there was no room for tumim, and it was a war of self defense. It was a war of self defense,
You mean the time
and
of Purim?
huh?
In the time
Time
of
of
Purim,
Purim
there was
was
no
a war.
Arbitrament, you're saying?
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
no
right. That wasn't the
no
question.
Beis Hamikdash.
Right.
No Beis Hamikdash. It was a war. It was a war of self defense. The one that they got permission from to fight in the self defense was Achashverosh.
No, but even though, let's say, Mitzrayim or Ammon and Moab, the restrictions if they want to convert, for Amalek, there was no restrictions. Like,
Well, there's a strange Mechilta. Mechilta says that if they come from all the nations, you accept them. Umay Amalek umebeso ein mekablim. But if they come from Amalek and his descendants, you're not mekabel him. Now, so first of all, some say that the fact that the Gemara says that Bnei Banav Shel Haman disagrees with that. Others say no. That's talking about when there was a before the time of Sanchoriv. That's talking the time of David the Mechilta. Because it's talking about the Ger HaMaleki that killed Shaul. So that, but when once Bas and Korah of a Bibel is Kol Olam Kulo, so then this halacha that we're not makabel gerim from Amalek doesn't apply, and then we could say so that would be another. That's another possible pshat that's used. So, and then some say that to be a descendant of Amalek, you have to be considered a descendant of Amalek, it has to be a descendant on the father's side, not on the mother's side. So the Bnei Banav even says Bnei Banav shall Haman, but there might have been a mother somewhere in between, you know. So there are all kinds of pshatim given, but one thing is for sure: none of the poskim mentioned that halacha. Whatever the reason is, none of the poskim mentioned that halacha.
okay, thank you. Have a good week, everyone.
Yeah.